So Priti Patel has decided it was a great idea to defend her immigration record live on Sky on the Sun News. So Priti Patel has just given this golden clip to Reform UK to campaign on. I think some people were probably worried that her close friendship with Nigel Farage would have made her a prospective Tory defector, but not after this.
But there's also been some downsides since.
Tell me.
Well, let's have a look at the graph. Net migration.
Yeah.
Look at that. That was on your watch. Where exactly on that graph were you the Home Secretary in charge of Britain?
So, well, we should first of all recognise that we ended free movement.
Yeah, and you ended free movement for Europeans and you threw the borders open to the rest of the world, and the graph...
We always said that in Brexit, Harry.
No, come on. That is not fair. You did not say we're going to hit 1.2 million net migrants.
No, we did not say that.
We're going to allow 1.2 million people into the country.
So let me finish.
In 1 year.
So let me finish. Brightest and the best come into our country. People on skilled work routes and visas.
Is that the brightest and the best?
We've always said, well, look at it's legal migration, Harry. It's legal. People who come here and work and contribute to our economy. Brightest and the best. Look at the points-based immigration system. For the first time ever, Harry, let me give you some facts.
Go on.
For the first time ever, we have a points-based immigration system, counting people in and out. You can turn off the immigration system at any stage in terms of what our economy needs and doesn't need. You know, the government should have done more, absolutely, on skills and training Brits.
Did every one of those 1.2 million people that flooded into the country in the last 3 years, did they need to come here?
So what would you say to the Ukrainians that are in our country?
That's 300,000.
It is now
tops.
300. What would you say to the BNOs? What would you say also to people that came here through
Come on, you're fudging the numbers there.
I'm not fudging the numbers. I'm telling you now.
300,000 Ukrainians on a temporary fix is not 1.2 million people coming to this country to take jobs that you promised were going to go to Sun readers and people who voted for Brexit.
Those are skilled visas, Harry. We made it quite clear. These are people that work, you know, skilled visa routes, all the skills in terms of NHS, people that are working in our National Health Service. We had something called a pandemic. You remember health and social care visas as well. I'm not fine with it. I haven't said that.
Would you like to apologise to all the people that voted Brexit for the fact that you misled them and saying we're going to take back control of our borders, and then you threw them open and let in millions of people?
That is totally distortionary, and that's not true. And to be quite frank, we made it quite clear it'd be people from the rest of the world, people with skills, based on our economy. And I think people should apologise for those who are saying that actually...
You would like an apology?
People in the pandemic came here, health and social care visas. What would have happened to our NHS? Are we now saying, are you and others saying we don't need those people in our NHS?
Yes, we are saying that because it was an infinitesimally small number of health and social care visas, and the rest of them were family reunification or humanitarian or student visas or dependents or skilled workers who are actually not net tax contributors. It's shocking, actually, that Kemi Badenoch decided, while urging her party to move on from the failures of the past, to then appoint Priti Patel as Foreign Secretary and place this albatross around her neck when Patel, a self-described progressive who is defending her immigration record during the Tory leadership election that sank her campaign, is now going out there and trying to defend the immigration record that delivered them the worst election defeat in their party's history yet again. So, let's take her claims point by point, shall we? Let's look at the costs of the Boriswave. This is the Centre for Migration Control. They found that Boriswave dependents who entered since 2021 will cost taxpayers $35 billion by 2028. This is using Freedom of Information requests to the Home Office and estimates of the costs of migrants from the OBR that has calculated that if you arrive age 25 by the age of claiming your pension, you'll have cost the taxpayer £166,000 each. And again, it's more costly if you were born here. But anyway, that's the only assumption we're working on. And they've calculated the cost of the taxpayer of over 500,000 migrant dependents will be $34.7 billion by 2028. And that's a minimum number. They calculated the total net cost of child dependents on the UK, let in under the post-Brexit immigration system that Patel herself authored and defends. There will be $26.63 billion by 2028. Meanwhile, the rest of the $34.7 billion figure is made up from adult dependents allowed into Britain since 2021, over half of whom do not work while in Britain and will claim benefits. Also, remember that if you are a second-generation migrant, or third-generation even, according to studies in Denmark and the Netherlands, if you are from the Middle East, North Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, Pakistan and Turkey, then over your lifetime, even if you are in work, you are never a net tax contributor. And that is the case for if you were born in the country as well. And they also commit more crime than their native Danish or Dutch counterparts. So even if you are born in Britain, which these figures don't account for because we don't have the data for that, the children of immigrants that Fraser Nelson is praising as the solution to our demographic economic woes will end up costing more money than just the children of native Brits in the first place. The CMC's figures include any contributions that dependents might make via income tax, VAT, and council tax. Even with these caveats, across the time frame, public expenditure to cater for these individuals will consume a year's worth of income tax from 4.2 million Brits. Now listen to this madness, right? In 2020, introducing their plans for the post-Brexit immigration system, the Conservative Party announced, this is Priti Patel, skilled workers and postgraduate students will continue to have the right to bring dependents. The Home Office estimated that just 5,000 to 20,000 dependents would arrive in the following 5 years. That was their modelling, 5,000 to 20,000. So before, remember when they said that after 2028, only 340,000 people would come? Those are the kind of baseline assumptions that the modelling is based on, that then ministers and SPADs can't question because the civil servants, remember, are impartial, and therefore if they try and question the numbers, they are polluting impartial advice with partisan politics, and so they make policies based on impartial but erroneous numbers handed to them by idiot civil servants who themselves are often diversity hires. And so it leads to situations like this where the ministers make decisions based on faulty data and it ends up with disastrous and unforeseen consequences. Now, it's still foreseeable, and you have people like Fraser Nelson and Priti Patel who even after the unforeseen consequences have made themselves manifest, continue to not only deny them, but demand apologies for their betrayals and then say, but it's still happening and it's a good thing. So they are still to blame. But also, it just goes to show you how the system is self-perpetuating, even if there is an active malice in the system. And I think Priti Patel is an example of said active malice that I'll get onto in a moment. Because even though they thought only 5,000 to 20,000 dependents would come, between 2021 and the July 2024 general election that ousted the Conservatives, 533,523 dependents were recorded as arriving in the UK under the scheme. Let's go on to health and social care visas that Priti Patel decided to defend as well. This is from Carl Williams, who's from the Centre for Policy Studies, and he's writing in The Telegraph. 647,000 immigrants received health and social care visas from January 2021 to June 2024. But this isn't 647,000 health and social care workers. Only 270,000 workers, and then 377,000 dependents. And bear in mind, a study of health and social care visas given in 2023 by Miriam Cates, read out in Parliament, found that of the 70,000 visas issued in the study, only 11,000 vacancies were filled. So either they were outnumbered by dependents, or they had taken up the health and social care visa, come over, and not occupied a health and social care role. So they're just using it as an opportunity to get into the country and then disappear into the system. And probably go on benefits. The Department for Health and Social Care estimated that 6,000 migrants a year would make use of it. Again, they only thought 6,000 a year would make use of it. Other departments thought it could be as high as 40,000. In fact, in 2023 alone, 348,000 migrants received a health and social care visa, 58 times the Department for Health and Social Care's projection. 58% of actual workers on the route are social carers, generally on like sub-median salaries, and just 0.5% are doctors. So when Priti Patel says all of these people are necessary for the NHS, only 0.5% are doctors. 3% total doctors and nurses, so 2.5% are nurses, and again, qualifications fraud is rife, particularly with nurses from African countries like Nigeria, as reported by The Guardian, so it's not a far-right conspiracy. In 2022, there was a 606% increase in the number of modern slavery cases in the care sector, with more than 700 potential victims. Last February, it was revealed that a single testing centre in Ibadan, Nigeria's third largest city, had provided at least 719 people, 1.7% of all Nigerians on the visa, with fraudulent qualifications. They all ended up as NHS midwives, which would explain rising rates of mortality in different places. Now, I excoriated Patel on her record back in August during the Conservative leadership election, and I wrote the following. Only 3% of immigrants that arrived in 2023 were doctors or nurses. Just 17% of NHS staff are foreign-born, which explains why it actually worked before 1997 when something happened. So the need for all this small share of immigration could actually be eliminated if you lifted the cap on medical school places for British students. Do you know we cap the number of doctors and nurses we can actually train here from our own population and then import them from inferior healthcare and training systems from around the world? It's insane, right? if you actually provided the salaries and the retention incentives to keep homegrown talent at home rather than fleeing to Australia where they're paid better and the conditions are better, then we could solve the NHS staffing problems overnight. The cap was imposed for, get this, fears of overproducing doctors and devaluing the profession, something which importing doctors 2.5 times more likely to be reprimanded for malpractice, or Nigerian nurses committing, quote, industrial scale qualifications fraud, somehow doesn't. It somehow doesn't devalue the profession to do that, but generating an abundance of overqualified doctors that we could then export around the world, while also having a healthy level ourselves, that somehow devalues the profession. This country's mental, right? Neither is importing staff improving the quality, availability, or the price of care. Costs keep climbing, abuse is rife, and a study of 70,000 of the 350,000 visas issued in 2023 found that only 11,000 positions were filled. While health and social care visa applications have fallen 76% since January 2024 due to a ban on bringing dependents, skilled worker visa applications have risen by 50% in the same 4-month period, nullifying the restrictions. Since 2011, the foreign-born share of the UK workforce has risen from 14 to 21%, and 74% of all new jobs in that time frame were given to immigrant workers. Now, has this made us wealthier? Patel's Home Office originally set the skilled worker salary threshold at £25,600, right? So she says all these people are legal. First of all, it doesn't matter whether they're illegal or illegal. They commit more crime and they take more in taxes out than the native population. But whether they're legal or illegal doesn't matter because the skilled worker threshold that she set was 25 grand. That's lower than the average salary in the UK. She also changed the composition of migrants from 80% EU pre-pandemic to 80% non-EU post-pandemic. Since 2021, culture drastically different. Data from Denmark and the Netherlands show that these Indian, Nigerian, and MENAPT migrants are, in aggregate, never net tax contributors across their lifetimes, even when in work. Disconcerting for those who insist that the problem is purely one of integration, like Fraser and Nelson, is that their children, the second-generation immigrants born in the host countries, are not net tax contributors either. They retain the culture, criminality, and work patterns of their parents. Non-EU migrants and their descendants in the Netherlands were an annual net cost of 27 billion euros between 2016 and 2019, 400 billion between 1995 and 2019. By contrast, Western European, East Asian, and Anglosphere migrants were annual net contributors to the tune of 1 billion euros. Now, we actually know how much these migrants will cost Britain specifically, thanks to admissions by the Office for Budget Responsibility. I've reprinted them here under this handy graph where Robert Jenrick actually points out, and again, he's in the shadow cabinet alongside Priti Patel, that in the first quarter of 2024, the government gave more family reunification visas to dependents and relatives of Somalians than to visas to physicists, chemists, and biologists from every other country put together. So not only is the immigration system not working, but the majority of immigrants that are being imported are not working themselves at all. Because in the OBR report, they admitted that over 60% of migrants on skilled worker visas, the ones that Priti Patel keeps appealing to and saying that she deserves an apology from her critics for having brought in, 60% of them make less than the median British salary. Both the Centre for Policy Studies and the Centre for Migration Control actually estimate that more than 70%, I think it's 72% exactly. This means most skilled workers are net tax recipients. So the word skilled worker, whenever it's trotted out, means nothing, as do health and social care visas. They mean nothing either. They are all net tax detriments, and they're accelerating the demographic and cultural change of the country at the expense of the expressed wishes of the native British population. So these people that are the skilled workers, half of them in total earn less than half the average salary and cost the British taxpayer £151,000 by retirement each. If they live to age of life expectancy, they cost £465,000. And this presumes that they arrive from age 25, but of course the studies from Denmark and the Netherlands show that if they're born here, they'll do the exact same thing. Rupert Lowe, by the way, has discovered that 40% of immigrants who arrived in 2022 to 2023 are already claiming state benefits, and Carl Williams, who we already mentioned before, calculated that just 5% of all visas issued every year, specifically 2022 to 2023, were given to immigrants that are likely to be net tax contributors. So 95% of all immigrants imported every year are net tax detriments. And Priti Patel wants us to apologise to her for criticising her for bankrupting the country and rendering it unrecognisable. As for the Indian Nigerian immigrants that she brought over specifically, who are meant to be oh so skillful, well, if you scroll down from her fellow shadow cabinet minister Neil O'Brien's Substack, who has put together the data in a series of graphs here, you'll see that these Indian and Nigerian immigrants make up a disproportionate amount of the new workforce. Since 2022, though, we've seen a cash decline in real terms for the median earnings of both Indian and Nigerian nationals aged 22 to 40 in prime working age. See that graph there, it just plummets towards the bottom. You can see one compared to UK nationals here. Here's the median monthly earnings of 22 to 40-year-old UK nationals versus the Indians and Nigerians. Basically, we're bringing in unproductive net tax dependents at the rate of $1 million a year. And that's thanks to Priti Patel's immigration policy that she demands we praise her for. Why did Patel do this, though? So she's been confronted with the fact that it's not a large number of humanitarian visas or doctors and nurses. It's not an abundance of net tax contributors and the best and brightest. Why does she keep pushing for it? Well, this was quite interesting. In an article from Mike Jones, formerly of Migration Watch UK, in The Critic, he noticed that there's a kind of ideology around the Commonwealth here. So she keeps talking about global Britain, right? But actually her priorities lie in one specific place. For the public, 3/4 of them, Brexit was about British nationalism, a clear mandate for restricting immigration and putting British interests first. But for the political elites like Patel, it became a victory for the UK's relationship with the Commonwealth and a signal to deepen ties with countries like India, Pakistan, and Nigeria. By the way, all Commonwealth citizens that come over to the UK can vote. Something to consider. For instance, and here's an example he gives from Patel, from a session entitled Global Britain and India to the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Patel gave a question to Mark Field MP. Quote, "You've mentioned Prime Minister Modi a couple of times. He is the architect of the term living bridge and effectively usage, and that's a spelling mistake on her part, the effective usage of the Indian diaspora community around the world, not only in the UK but more broadly, has helped to strengthen ties with key countries. Do you think our own Prime Minister understands the significance of the living bridge and why domestically diaspora communities matter when it comes to bilateral relationships?" Let me translate that for you. All Indian immigrants are living bridges to the motherland, specifically the Hindutva, Hindu supremacist, Modi regime in India. And so by bringing them over, they can act as living bridges to India. The diaspora communities can exert demographic pressure that they can then convert into democratic pressure and lobby for Hindu and Indian ethnic sectarian politics in Britain to the advantage of, presumably, second-generation Indian politicians like Patel herself, or even Rishi Sunak. And a number 10 advisor, Jennifer Powers, confirms this. She says 100% believes Suella Braverman, who is, I believe, ethnically Indian and Mauritian, because her father was an Indian colonial administrator in Kenya and her mother was from Mauritius. But she herself was trying to bring down immigration and fought against an Indian trade deal that would basically staple an Indian visa to absolutely everything that came out of that country. And Liz spoke about this in our interview. And Jennifer Powers says, Boris was super keen on India deal, but that meant visas, which many of us were deeply uncomfortable with. So Priti Patel, around the table, was pushing for this, and she was describing them all as living bridges. Rishi Sunak was also pushing for this since his 2014 policy paper, A Portrait of Modern Britain, in which he noted Indian migrants were the most numerous ethnic diaspora in England, that they earned more on average than other ethnic diasporas, although that's going down as the number of visas go up, because it turns out that a vast number of people actually create the conditions in a country rather than the conditions of the country shaping the people. And also that Indians voted Conservative more than other minority groups. And of course, they can vote on arrival as Commonwealth citizens. And he gave the following interview to Al Jazeera in 2014 after publishing this paper.
If you look beneath the slightly alarmist headlines here, you can see what they're trying to do. Indians, it decides, are hard-working and much more likely to vote Tory or Conservative. Africans, however, it concludes, are much more likely to vote for the Labour Party, but are also much more likely to be unemployed. The report author says the intention wasn't to raise an alarm about mass migration, but to help politicians better understand a changing electorate.
We examined socioeconomic status, life experiences, attitudes and aspirations, and what we found is on almost any metric you look at, there are striking differences between communities, and it would be good for politicians and policymakers to appreciate those.
Curious that he worked for Michael Gove's outlet Policy Exchange right before becoming Conservative MP, one of the safest seats in the country, and then rising quickly through the ranks to become Chancellor, and then helping orchestrate coups against two democratically elected Conservative leaders to then become the most unpopular Conservative Prime Minister in over a century. But he was very interested throughout his entire time working in government to ensure that 250,000 Indians reached our country every year. Funny that, isn't it? And this is why Suella Braverman pointed out in her recent speech at the Heritage Foundation, and I won't play it all here, that it wasn't just the blob and the civil service and the deep state, as Liz Truss very eloquently points out. She shared this clip. It was also Conservative MPs, ministers, around the table lobbying for looser immigration restrictions and preventing the likes of her and Liz from trying to reduce migration in line with their manifesto commitments. And it seems, as Priti Patel has been very honest about, and so has Rishi Sunak, these were for ethnic and religious sectarian reasons. It seems that the ethnic loyalties of a imported population are only recognised when, one, they're touted as a strength of diversity, but two, when they advantage the immigrant heritage politicians who are trying to bring them in and using them as living bridges. But if you notice this to criticise immigration policy and say that they might have indigestible tribal loyalties elsewhere and this might affect our politics, well, one, you're called a racist conspiracy theorist by the Home Office, and then two, you're blocked by Fraser Nelson, who says actually this is just a good thing. Weird that. I guess we finally discovered who the our in diversity as our strength is. Second generation politicians with pre-existing ethnic and religious loyalties elsewhere than Britain.
Thank you for watching that clip from Tomlinson Talks. If you liked that and you would like to see more, you can get the full 90-minute show every week on a Wednesday afternoon, live from 3 p.m, only on lotuseaters.com, and all of the other content that my colleagues produce behind the paywall for as little as £5 a month. Thank you very much for supporting us, and I hope to see you there. Until next time, goodbye.